Above the village of Coniston, in Wharfedale in the Yorkshire Dales, there is a limestone cliff called Mossdale Scar. A stream called Mossdale Beck runs down off the moor towards it, reaches the base of the cliff, and disappears. It does not pool. It does not slow. It goes into the rock, and it is gone. Everything that falls on the moor above every hour of Yorkshire rain, every stretch of drizzle, every summer thunderstorm is collected by that moor and funneled to this one point in the limestone. What happens to it after that was, for most of the 20th century, one of the great unanswered questions of British caving. The cave beyond the entrance is called Mossdale Caverns, and it is not like other caves. Most people, when they picture a cave, picture a chamber. Height, space, a torch beam that reaches something. Mossdale is not that. Mossdale is a system of crawls passages so low that a caver moves through them flat on their stomach, helmet turned sideways, pushing their kit ahead of them with their hands, because there is no room to carry it any other way. Some of these crawls run for hundreds of meters without a single place where a person can sit up. The system is thought to extend for miles beneath the moor. To reach the far end, the section the cavers of the 1960s were most interested in, where the passages were still being extended into unexplored ground, took hours of continuous crawling, one body length at a time, in a passage the height of a chair seat. There is a second thing about Mossdale that every caver who entered it understood. The entire cave is the drain for the moor. A passage that is a tight crawl in dry weather is a passage that fills completely in wet weather. There is no high ground inside Mossdale. There are no chambers to climb into. When water enters the system, it does not rise gently up a wall while you find somewhere to wait it out. It arrives along the passage, from behind and in front, filling a space that was already too small for a person to sit upright in. Cavers knew this in 1967. It was not a secret. The rule was simple, and everyone followed it. Check the forecast and do not go into Mossdale when rain is expected. On the 24th of June, 1967, no rain was expected. 10 cavers gathered at Mossdale Scar that Saturday morning. Most were members of the Happy Wanderers Cave and Pothole Club, and associated Yorkshire caving groups, a scene that was, at that time, young, close, and largely made up of people in their 20s who worked ordinary jobs during the week and spent every weekend underground. The leader was David Adamson, aged 24, a research student. He knew Mossdale as well as anyone alive. He had been part of the effort to push the far passages, and he was the person the others deferred to on questions about the system. 6 of the 10 intended to go all the way to the far reaches. 4 had a shorter objective and planned to turn back earlier. The 6 who went deep were David Adamson, Michael Ryan, John Ogden, William Frakes, Colin Vickers, and Jeffrey Boyro. Their ages ran roughly from 18 to 24. The oldest of them had not yet turned 25. They went in during the late morning. The 4 with the shorter objective turned around as planned and came back out into the afternoon. Among the party at the surface was Morag Forbes, David Adamson's girlfriend, who had been caving in the system that day and had exited with the earlier group. They came out into changing weather. The storm that arrived over Wharfedale that afternoon was not forecast, and it was not gentle. It was the kind of summer downpour that saturates open moorland in minutes and then has nowhere to send the excess. Moorland does not absorb water the way soil does. Peat that is already damp sheds rain almost immediately. Every square meter of that moor began delivering water downhill, and every downhill route on that moor leads to the same place. The party at the surface watched the beck rise. They understood immediately what it meant. 6 people were somewhere in the far reaches of a system that was, at that moment, becoming the outflow pipe for several square miles of saturated moorland. They did what could be done. They attempted to dam and divert the beck away from the entrance, working in the rain with whatever was to hand, trying to reduce the volume going into the hole. Then, they went for help. The alarm reached the cave rescue organization, and cavers from across the Dales, men who had been at home, at work, at the pub, began driving towards Wharfedale in the rain. Inside, the 6 men would have had almost no warning at all. There is no sound in the far passages of Mossdale that would tell you a storm has started on the moor above. There is no change in the air. The first indication that anything has changed is water moving in a passage where it was not moving before, rising in a space that has a ceiling 40 centimeters above the floor. At that point, the exit is hours of flat crawling away, and the crawl is filling from both directions. The rescue effort at Mossdale became one of the largest in the history of British caving. Rescuers worked through the night and into the following days on a single objective that had to be achieved before anything else was even possible: getting the water out of the entrance passages. Until the water level dropped, no rescuer could enter the system at all. The same geometry that trapped the 6 men made the cave impossible to enter from outside. They dug channels. They built dams. They brought in pumps. The work was continuous, physical, and conducted by volunteers, many of whom knew the missing men personally. The water level began to fall. When the first teams were able to push into the system, they moved towards the far reaches along the route the 6 had taken. They found them in the crawls. The men had died where the passage was too low to lift their heads above the water. They had been moving towards the exit. The evidence indicated they had understood what was happening and had turned for the surface, and that the water had reached them along a passage that offered nowhere to go. There was no chamber. There was no airspace. There was no version of Mossdale in which they could have waited. 6 young men died in Mossdale Caverns on the 24th of June, 1967. It remains the worst caving disaster in British history. The entrance to Mossdale Caverns was subsequently gated and locked. Access has been restricted ever since, controlled by permit through the landowner and the caving authorities, and granted rarely. For decades, the system has been, in practical terms, closed. The reason is not sentiment. The reason is that nothing about Mossdale has changed. The moor above it still collects rain. The passages are still flat crawls with no high ground. The cave is still the drain, and it still fills exactly as fast as it filled in 1967. And there is still nowhere inside it for a person to go when it does. The disaster changed British caving permanently. It hardened attitudes towards weather forecasting before trips, sharpened rules around flood-prone systems, and it entered the culture of the sport as a permanent reference point, the thing that is invoked whenever anyone suggests entering a drain system on a day with rain in the forecast. But the specific lesson of Mossdale is narrower and harsher than check the weather. The 6 men did check. No rain was forecast. The storm arrived anyway, over a moor with no one on it, and the cave gave them no signal until the signal was the water itself. The Veryovkina Massif rises above the Black Sea coast in Abkhazia, a disputed territory on the northwestern edge of Georgia. It is a block of limestone, heavily karstified, sitting at altitude with the sea in view, and for the last several decades, it has been the site of the most competitive vertical exploration on Earth. 2 of the deepest known caves in the world are on this massif. For years, the record moved between them. Krubera Cave, also called Veryovkina, the Crow's Cave, held it. Then, in 2018, a Russian team from the Perovo Speleo Club pushed a neighboring system past it. That system is Veryovkina Cave, and at the time of writing it is the deepest known cave on the planet, surveyed to a depth of 2,212 meters. 2,200 meters of depth is difficult to hold in the mind, so here is the shape of it. The entrance is a narrow shaft. Below that entrance is a sequence of vertical drops, pitch after pitch after pitch descended on rope, for the first several hundred meters. Below that, the cave becomes a long descending sequence of shafts and passages that continues, in stages, for well over a kilometer of further depth. Reaching the bottom is not a day trip, it is an expedition. Teams establish underground camps and live inside the cave for days at a time, sleeping in tents pitched on ledges in total darkness, hauling food and fuel and rope downward in stages, and then hauling themselves back up. The cave is named for Alexander Veryovkin, a Soviet caver who died during an exploration dive in 1983 in a different cave in the region. The name was given in his memory. At the bottom of Veryovkina, the cave does something that most caves at their lowest point do. It ends in a sumpa section where the passage is completely full of water. The bottom of Veryovkina is in effect a water table. It is where the cave meets the level below, which everything is flooded. Teams working at that depth were mapping the terminal section, taking measurements, and pushing side passages in search of further extension. They were working at the lowest known point in the Earth's crust that a human being can walk to. They were also standing at the bottom of a 2-kilometer drain. Everything about Veryovkina that makes it extraordinary is a consequence of water. The shafts were cut by water. The depth exists because water has been moving down through this limestone for a very long time, following the gradient from the high plateau towards the sea. The cave is a route that water uses, which means the cave is a route that water can use again, at short notice, whenever the surface delivers more than the system is currently carrying. There is no warning system for this. There is no signal at 2,200 meters depth that tells you what the sky is doing on the plateau. The team at the bottom of Veryovkina in autumn 2018 had the same information about the surface weather that the 6 men had in the crawls at Mossdale. None. In the autumn of 2018, a Perovo team was working in the deep section of Veryovkina when the water arrived. The reports from the expedition describe a flood pulse of extraordinary speed. Water entered the lower system, and the level began climbing in the terminal section faster than the team could gather equipment. This was not a gradual rise over hours. This was a wave of water working its way down a 2-kilometer vertical drain and hitting the bottom of it, where the team was. They abandoned gear and went up. Going up a cave like Veryovkina, under normal conditions, is a physical ordeal measured in days. Going up it in front of rising water is the same ordeal with a deadline attached, conducted on rope that is now in the path of falling water, through shafts that are now conducting a flood, by a team that has already been underground long enough to be tired before the emergency started. There is no faster gear. There is no way to speed it up when something is coming. They climbed, in stages, upward, through a system that was filling behind them. Every member of the team reached the surface. They lost equipment. They lost the camp. The lower sections of the cave were, for a period afterwards, entirely underwater sections that had been dry passage where people had been standing and working were now part of the water table. But every person who was at the bottom of the deepest cave on Earth when it flooded came back out of it. 6 deaths in one. None in the other. The difference is not skill, and it is not caution, and it is not courage. Everyone involved in both incidents was competent, and everyone involved in both incidents was doing the thing correctly by the standards of their time. The difference is geometry. In Veryovkina, the exit route runs upward. Every meter of progress towards the surface is also a meter of progress away from the water. A vertical cave, in a flood, gives the people inside it the one thing that matters, somewhere higher to be. In Mossdale, the exit route runs sideways, through passages with a ceiling 40 centimeters above the floor, for hours. There is no upward. The Arabica Massif is still the deepest place a person can walk to on this planet, and teams still descend into Veryovkina, still camp on ledges in total darkness, still work at the bottom of a 2-kilometer drain with no information about the weather above them. Whatever else the cave is, it is at least stable. It is not stable. It is plumbing. Every cave in limestone country was made by water and remains, permanently, a route that water is entitled to use. The rock does not change. What moves through the rock changes constantly, according to weather that is happening somewhere you cannot see, on ground you are not standing on. And it arrives without any announcement at all. The 6 men in Mossdale had no warning. The team in Veryovkina had no warning. The only difference was which way the passage went.